Do you baby your students? Do you want to just pick them up no matter how old they are and hug every worry out of them? Is your first instinct when you ask them to do a challenging task and they look at you with those big sad eyes to think, oh, you poor thing, of course you won't be able to do that. And your mind starts running through all the reasons why what you've just asked them to do is just too much. His parents separated 2 years ago. She's had a cough for 3 weeks. The custodian has been repainting the halls and the smell is really strong. The principal changed that semester and the students are a little confused. The school changed the food providers 2 years ago and the students just don't like the desserts. And what's become the all-time deal breaker? The pandemic was just so traumatic for them. Sound familiar? Do you have any more you could add to the list? Or do you expect your students to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and become responsible, accountable, dependable? Now, these are not so much judgments as they are comments on culture. I'm North American, and I believe that for the majority of us, we know that at 18, we better have it together because that's it for coddling. University, here we come, and then the search for an apartment, a job, and mommy and daddy's bank account is closed. However, I live in Spain, and it is different here. When I first moved here, I was horrified. 30-something-year-olds still living at home? Their mommy or the cleaning woman was washing their clothes, making them dinner, doing all the shopping, not paying any rent. And they continue this way until they make the decision to get married to their partner of 10 or 15 years, who's still living with his parents. A perfect way to see the radical difference in expectations regarding a person's independence factor is a quick comment between myself and a friend who is Spanish during one of the first years I moved here. We were walking our dogs and she mentioned that her nephew was staying with her and he might wake up while she was gone, and so she needed to hurry home. I asked how old the nephew was, thinking he must be 8 or 9, the way her face was white and she was frantic to get home. When she told me he was 18, my reaction was, well, we can relax and he can take care of himself. While she had already turned on a dime and was racing back to her house to make breakfast for this poor, helpless 18-year-old who was going to be confused waking up in an unfamiliar bed. Needless to say, the culture shock that brought on left me speechless, well, pretty much up until now. More than 20 years later. Another example of the difference between a North American and someone in the Mediterranean. Now, you're going to really like this one, whether you're from a more independently minded culture or one that's saturated in leaning on the family. A few years ago, I had a fairly basic outpatient surgery and came home, and I was sure I could take care of myself fine, a few hours in bed, and then I'd be good to go. Nevertheless, my neighbor promised that she'd come over to just sit with me and help me around the house for the first few hours for the first day. Like a true independent subject of my culture, I was not really concerned about my need for a nursemaid. And yet, I thought it might be novel to have someone there for just once, just in case there were complications I wasn't expecting. Well, culture clash came where I least expected it. I was lying down, chatting with her, relaxing into the whole scene of a recovering patient, when all of a sudden she received a call from her son. Her face became white. She told me she had to go immediately as there was an emergency. She grabbed her things and ran out of the apartment. I assumed something horrible had happened and waited anxiously to find out. Okay, ready for this? Later that day, she sent me a message to tell me that her 34-year-old son had had a very strong sunburn and was frantic from the pain. Okay, you tell me, how are you reacting? If you're Spanish or from a culture with similar dynamics, this does not surprise you in the least. If you're North American or from a culture with similar insistence on independence, your face just became white from the shock of the absurdity. And yes, that's a North American judgment. Please forgive me. So, how does all this pertain to education? I always get there, you know it. Can you find the tie-in? Well, obviously, this attitude of babying and coddling, overprotecting, permeates the attitudes in the classroom for the teacher and the students, because they know that if something seems a little bit challenging, they can find a fairly easy excuse that the teachers will accept, and boom, learning shuts down. And it's not as if the teachers don't know that it's happening. If I'm working with a fairly self-aware teacher, she'll wholeheartedly admit that she lets her students escape challenges because she feels sorry for them, but she does it anyway. So who's right? No one's right. It's clear. And yet, I'm very happy that I was not coddled and overindulged when it came to assignments or responsibilities. I mean, I'm pretty productive, and it's mostly because my teachers expected me to be. Although, man, would I still have loved my high school literature teacher to have accepted that one word mistake from the 100-line poem I had to recite for her. Oh well, I'm a better person because of it, she told me over and over again. So, what can we do? How can we embed independence in the learning environment even if our predilection is to shower them with excuses? How can we slowly wean ourselves away from coddling students? Let's start with norms and consequences. Very easy. Let's just say that two students have chosen to disregard the classroom norms on doing their own work. Now, in many cultures, we call this cheating. But that's a discussion for a whole other video, and I actually talk about it. You'll find it on one. It's actually a very long title, but it's a great video and it's very short. If you disagree with core values of your culture, what do you do in the classroom? Go ahead and watch that, and we'll let that part go for now. So, you have two students who didn't do their own work. Instead of sitting them down and looking at them meaningfully and asking them why they would have done something so inconsistent with honesty in the class norms, instead of reacting to their big, sad, scared eyes, waiting for you to give them a verdict, which will, if you're Spanish, probably be to tell them not to do it again because the next time they will pay the consequences, which will never happen. Take a deep breath, take a step back, and let them learn and take responsibility for their decisions at the same time. Check this out. You're going to give them 3 choices to make this right. 1, they can do the task again on a completely different topic so that they have the opportunity to learn something new and prove to themselves that they're capable of doing their own work. Second choice, they can write a letter to their guardian explaining what they did, how they fully accept responsibility for their choice, and what their decision will be in the future. Third choice, they can make a 15-minute podcast on honesty, responsibility, integrity, and how that manifests in one day in the learning environment. Not bad, right? I mean, you can take these 3 choices and adapt them to the age of your students. I think you'll see that these 3 choices include a learning of responsibility in different areas of their lives. All of them valid, all of them necessary in the process of maturation and building self-esteem and self-regulation. So, what do you think? Don't you think it's a really nice way of beginning to not baby your students and expect accountability for them? Let me know and see you again for more. For more educational tips like this, please press like and subscribe.